you donate to the Habitat Restore, you do more than just clear out stuff from your home or office. By donating it to the Restore, you can help build a new home for someone in need. The donation is tax deductible, and they will even come pick it up from you. Check out the Restore for yourself. Located behind the Richmond Mall or on Facebook.
In the studio with me, Representative Andy Barr, the 6th District of Kentucky, up for re-election and touring the area, talking about things going on. Congressman, good to be with you again.
Good to be with you as well, Bill.
Well, let's get this thing started by saying that it's an interesting, every time I talk to you, it's an interesting political year. We've had an interesting political decade, and so you're up against an opponent who's making some noise, and how's it going as far as the re-election campaign?
Well, you know, I've always said that if you do the job you're elected to do, the politics will take care of itself. And we've been more focused on the job and getting results and delivering solutions to the people of Madison County and the 6th District more than politics. But politics and communicating our record and the differences between the candidates is, I understand, part of the job. But really, we have been focused over these last 2 years on an agenda that has produced a booming economy, tax cuts, deregulation, reform of the Dodd-Frank financial control law that has increased Americans' access to the financial system. People's pocketbooks are better off. People's economic prospects are better off. Not only is unemployment the lowest it's been in a generation, in both the country and in Kentucky, but there are more job openings in America today than people who are unemployed. Growth is at historic levels, over 4%. Companies' profits are surging. Wages are up for the first time since before the recession. And people are better off not just because they have a smaller tax bill, but their paychecks are growing with bonuses and wage increases and increased benefits from work. So people are better off now than they were just 2 years ago from an economic standpoint. My colleagues gave me the responsibility at the beginning of this Congress to lead and chair the subcommittee with jurisdiction over the Federal Reserve System. And in that capacity, I get a chance to talk to the top economists in the country, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Jay Powell. And Jay, in our conversations, has confirmed that the data is clear, that this is the best economy in 50 years. So our policy shift, our change in policy, the tax cuts, the deregulation, unleashing American energy dominance, and unclogging the financial system, that has all produced robust economic growth, upward mobility, and much more prosperity in the country. But it's not just about the economy, Bill. We're also tackling challenges facing our communities, like the opioid epidemic.
There was a story in the press yesterday that said that more Americans have died from opioid overdoses in 2017 than died in automobile accidents or with firearms.
That's correct.
And
unfortunately,
that's an astonishing thing.
115 Americans, Bill, are dying every single day of an opioid overdose. Kentucky is the epicenter of this problem. We have the third highest drug overdose mortality rate in the country. I had the opportunity to fly on Air Force One with the president last year from Louisville, Kentucky to Andrews Air Force Base, and during that time the Air Force officer came to the back of the plane and said, "Hey, the president wants you to go up to his office." So of course I did, and I took that opportunity to talk to the president about Kentucky, about our signature industries, the bourbon industry, the horse industry, the auto manufacturing sector, our agriculture sector. But I also told him about this drug epidemic that we've got that is not only destroying lives and causing families to lose loved ones, but it's also inhibiting our economy. Mm-hmm. If there is one problem in our economy, it's that there's not enough people to fill jobs. And many of the employers in Madison County tell me they can't find people to pass a drug test. And it's not just Madison County. It's all over the 6th Congressional District in Kentucky. So the problem is acute. The president did respond. He invited me to the White House when he declared a national public health emergency, and the Congress is responding. And we're responding in a bipartisan way. We passed 58 opioid-related bills, including a bill that I introduced. The bill that I introduced is called the Thrive Act, Transitional Housing for Recovery in Viable Environments Act. It was inspired by a visit to Central Kentucky from Dr. Ben Carson, the Secretary of HUD. We have jurisdiction over HUD in the Financial Services Committee, and I invited Dr. Carson to come to Lexington come to Central Kentucky, look at these not-for-profit organizations, the faith-based organizations that are doing great work with addiction recovery housing. And the secretary was very impressed with the Hope Center, with Revive Lifehouse in Nicholasville, Liberty Place here in Madison County, I know does important work. The Chrysalis House for Moms and Newborns over in Lexington does important work. The Shepherd's House, St. James Place. All of these wonderful organizations are starved for resources. There's not enough beds. And so what we learned from these groups is that while there may be some resources for medication-assisted treatment, or once someone comes out of a period of incarceration, they're typically without resources and they don't have a structured environment or living environment. So my bill would create a set aside of housing choice vouchers for these not-for-profit faith-based organizations that provide a period of long-term post-treatment recovery. Gives them job training, financial literacy, life skills, accountability, 12-step programs in a structured environment. That is a recipe for success for long-term addiction recovery. We also are helping with law enforcement. I passed an amendment to the appropriations bill that increases the high-intensity drug trafficking area program by $26 million. That was my amendment. It is now law. Madison County is designated as a HIDTA county to keep these poisons out of our community. We're doing important work on border security. We put a down payment on border security. We increased funding by over $1 billion for Customs and Border Protection because the Department of Homeland Security says that 80% of all heroin that's interdicted comes across our southwest border. That's why we so desperately need border security in this country, which I voted for. I also was in the Oval Office for the president's signing of the bipartisan bill I worked on, the Interdict Act, which gives Customs and Border Protection more tools to intercept fentanyl, that deadly synthetic opioid that is being brought into our country. So we are making a difference, getting grants for places like the Chrysalis House, $2.6 million for moms and babies. In the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, I included a study, a provision that was recommended by the University of Kentucky to provide a nationwide study on best practices on how to take care of neonatal abstinence syndrome. We're working with a group of anesthesiologists in Kentucky on enhanced recovery after surgery for narcotics avoidance and revised prescribing practices. So there's not one thing we're doing.
To say, I mean, there's no magic bullet.
That's right, and we had a field hearing, the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee field hearing on the Thrive Act, my bill that received bipartisan support that passed the House. We had a field hearing of the Subcommittee of Housing and Insurance. The chairman, Sean Duffy, came down from Wisconsin to hold this hearing with me, where we heard from experts and leaders in this area in recovery, and the University of Kentucky researchers say we need my bill. We need Andy Barr's bill, the Thrive Act, to help deal with this problem. And we're dealing with the problem in a lot of different ways: treatment, education, prevention, law enforcement, and this long-term transitional housing. And the Congress has responded to the President's declaration of a public health emergency, and we've done so in a bipartisan way. We've worked across the aisle to get this done. A $7 billion investment, the largest investment ever in tackling a drug problem. So the economy is booming. We're getting results on combating the opioid epidemic. And we've also done some very important work in reforming the VA to get our veterans better access to community care. I voted for a bill to expand the usefulness of the GI Bill. We passed a bill to designate Camp Nelson as a national monument over in Jessamine County to bring that story to the rest of the country. We also passed a bill to honor our veterans, to rename the Lexington VA in honor of 2 World War II heroes. Rebuilding the military, voting to increase funding to address the readiness crisis, giving our troops the largest pay raise in a decade. And on national security, as chairman of that subcommittee, I also have oversight over the international operations of Treasury. And there we've been a national leader on sanctions policy. My bill, the Otto Warmbier North Korea Nuclear Sanctions Act, passed in a big bipartisan way. A lot of politicians like to talk about putting country over party. 415-2 was the vote on my bill to impose the toughest economic sanctions ever directed at North Korea. And our ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, has told me twice, once in person, that my legislation was critical in bringing China to the table at the UN Security Council to cut off the flow of illicit finance to Pyongyang. That's one of the reasons why North Korea came to the negotiating table in Singapore, why we have 50 of our MIAs from the Korean conflict back in the United States. The ambassador from South Korea, I had dinner with him in May, and he told me that as a result of our sanctions pressure, as a result of us abandoning this failed policy of the past of strategic patience and moving towards tough maximum economic pressure, we have cut off $1 billion in hard currency to the north. And that's one of the reasons why you haven't seen ballistic missile testing and nuclear testing in recent months.
But they still are working on modernizing their facilities. It's not like they're like dismantling the weapons or anything like that.
No question, a lot more work to be done. My friend and former colleague Mike Pompeo has been keeping us up to date as Secretary of State. And indeed, you're right. The belligerence of that regime continues. The fact that we haven't seen yet progress on denuclearization is a concern, but that's exactly why we're not making the same mistake that we did with Iran. We're not giving upfront sanctions relief with the promise down the road of denuclearization. We're keeping the pressure on, and frankly, as the congressman of the 6th District of Kentucky, we're playing a major role in advancing national security on that area and in other areas, sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Iran, and modernizing the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States to block malign investments from China where they're stealing our intellectual property, investing in U.S. critical technology firms. We're blocking negative and malign investment from China in the United States as well.
You and I have known each other a long time. I seem to think that I remember that you were something of a free trader when it came to the trading with the rest of the world.
Still am.
What do you think about what we've been up to recently with discussion of tariffs being raised and some strategic industries in the United States being targeted by our trading partners? Are you down with that?
Well, it is a political season, and there are some false narratives out there that, for whatever reason, I don't stand up to this administration. This is a great example of where, as an ally of this administration on their economic policies, I have stood very strong in defense of Kentucky relative to the administration's trade policies. I've met with Secretary Mnuchin. I've had public exchanges and open hearings with Secretary Mnuchin and private meetings with Secretary Mnuchin about the Kentucky bourbon industry and the concern we have with the retaliatory tariffs. I've met with Secretary Ross on multiple occasions on behalf of Toyota and the supply chain and the disruption it's creating. The trade talks are creating with the price of steel and aluminum with respect to our consumption of steel and aluminum in Georgetown at Toyota. I have had private meetings with Larry Kudlow, the President's top economic advisor, and also with Peter Navarro, who is the President's trade advisor. And what I've told all of these top-ranking officials, and by the way, I also facilitated a meeting between the Vice President, Mike Pence, and the Kentucky Distillers Association about trade and tariffs. What I've told all of these folks in the administration is, look, we fully support the President's objective, which is a very good objective. There is an unfair and unlevel playing field out there. China is a cheater in trade. There are unfair trade practices, and we do need better deals. And so we fully support the Trump administration's efforts to get better deals for the American worker. And I'm all on board with that. But at the same time, we want to conduct searching oversight, and we are exercising searching oversight over the administration on their strategy. As I told Peter Navarro, he said the president's strategy with the EU is working because of the announcement in the Rose Garden. And I told him, I said, well, we appreciate that we're lowering the temperatures between the United States and the EU, but when tariffs on Kentucky bourbon exports are zero, that's when the president's strategy is working. So bottom line is
it's the uncertainty more than just, I have a very good friend in Western Kentucky who grows soybeans.
Right.
Every year he decides before planting whether he's going to be more in soybeans or more in corn this year.
Yeah.
And suddenly this year, massive monkey wrench thrown into commodity prices over soybeans. Right. And he's close to the edge on margins on agriculture as it is. And I wonder, how how a farmer can put a crop in the field not knowing, whether his own government's going to go back behind his back and destabilize the market.
Well, remember that 95% of all consumers live outside the United States. That's why I'm a free trader. That's why I support lowering tariffs. One thing that's encouraging to hear the administration say is, look, a tariff is a tax. And this administration has proven that they've worked with us to lower taxes. The ideal tax is zero. And so tariffs need to be zero on both sides of the border. That's what we're working towards. But we want them to go ahead and wrap this up. We want them to go ahead and get these better deals, wrap up these negotiations quickly so that there's not a protracted period of uncertainty. One thing I will tell you is that as I talked to the chairman of the Federal Reserve, the top economist in the country, he has told me directly, face to face, that the data does not reflect that the economy has been in any way injured as a result of these trade negotiations.
Probably not
yet.
Not at a macro level. But there's a whole bunch of people at the micro level who have, through no fault of their own, found themselves. I go back to my friend who's a farmer. It's bad enough that you have to deal with the weather, which you can't predict,
yes,
or bugs, or this or that, or the other thing.
Right.
But suddenly, you've got a government policy, changing decades worth of trade policy
right.
in the country to his detriment.
And we've been engaged very closely with the Kentucky Farm Bureau. I've talked to the soybean farmers. We've talked to beef cattle farmers all around this district. We understand the concern, and we're communicating and expressing and conveying those concerns to this administration, working with them to get these trade negotiations wrapped up, to lower tariffs, to open up export markets for our agriculture community as well. So we're very sensitive to that, and I'll make a final point on this trade issue. I am in a very unique position to advocate on behalf of Kentucky agriculture, Kentucky bourbon, Kentucky Toyota, and other auto manufacturing, because I'm an ally of this administration. And what I've told them is, we have made so much progress on the economy through the leadership of this Congress and this president, cutting taxes, deregulation, Dodd-Frank reform to give community financial institutions more regulatory relief. We have the best economy in a generation. Let's not do anything on trade that could mitigate the benefits of this administration and this Congress's success on the economy. Other politicians who are routine and aggressive critics of this president will not have access, will not be able to be effective advocates for Kentucky with this administration. I am an effective advocate with this administration, fighting for Kentucky bourbon exports, fighting for Kentucky agriculture, fighting for Toyota because of my relationships with high-ranking administration officials.
I'm almost out of time here, but I want to ask you about the political story of the week, of the month, of the day, or what have you. We live in interesting times, and as you're going about the district, do you hear about the things that people are hollering about in Washington, Russia, and this and that, and where are you on all that?
Oh, yes, I mean, of course. But to me, what matters the most to my constituents is delivering solutions, delivering results. We're getting results on the economy, on national security, on combating the opioid epidemic, and even on a local level in Madison County. And we not only secured more money for HIDA for Madison County to keep these poisons out of our community, but it's $1 million grant for the EKU Scholar House, for example, that we've delivered. Or it's the making sure that the tax bill did not negatively impact Berea College, for example. We succeeded on that working with Dr. Lau Rulofs. It's the success we've gotten for the food pantry here in town and getting them a grant, or a Department of Justice grant for Hope's Wings to combat domestic violence here in Richmond. We're getting results. It's making sure that the demilitarization down at the Bluegrass Army Depot is still on pace, and we're getting the appropriations to make sure that demil starts according to schedule and stays on schedule. We got $49 million plus in appropriations for Madison County for the CSEP program, the Chemical Stockpile Emergency Preparedness Program. And even on tax reform, we're getting part of Madison County designated as a so-called opportunity zone. One thing that a lot of people don't talk about as much about these tax cuts is it's really lifting people in poverty out of poverty. It's really helping lower income people. the lowest income levels in this country have seen their confidence surge, primarily because of the lower unemployment rate and because wages are growing up. But what people don't talk about as much, and what I'm very excited about, is this opportunity zone, which is a part of the tax cut bill that will invite more private capital through tax relief to come into neighborhoods of economic distress, where there's been a history of economic distress. That will bring private investment and jobs and new businesses into neighborhoods that have had blight and have had economic difficulties over time. We are lifting people out of poverty because of better policies coming out of Washington, and it's an exciting time to be focusing on solutions. I get it. The country's divided. There's a polarizing environment in politics, but I've always said that if I get results for the people, which we've delivered a lot of results over these last 2 years, and if people are better off now, then the politics will take care of itself.
Do you ever just, you may not answer this, do you ever wish sometimes you wake up in the morning and that maybe the president was just a little more conventional in his communication style?
Well, I don't think, obviously the American people wanted unconventional. I mean, they elected an unconventional president. This is clearly an unconventional president. He has a different personality, to be sure, from other previous presidents. Some people love that. Some of my constituents absolutely hate that. I get it. There's people in this country who are disappointed about the outcome of the last election, and I understand that. The best way that I can be a good congressman for everybody, regardless of where they are on this president, is to try to bring people together and unite people based on an agenda of results. Whether it's tackling this opioid epidemic, whether it's delivering greater economic prosperity, securing the country, making it a stronger and safer country, or if it's what we've done on fighting disease, the 21st Century Cures Act. It's really frustrating to me that nobody talks about these successes. The news media is so focused on, divisive news stories. They don't talk about the bipartisan successes. We've had tremendous bipartisan success on the 21st Century Cures Act that we worked with, that delivers greater medical research dollars to the University of Kentucky Markey Cancer Center or to the Sanders Brown Center on Aging, precision medicine that's going on. So I just think
it's not as fun to talk about.
Well, maybe it's not. Maybe some people think it's not as newsworthy, but I think curing diseases is a big deal because let's face it, Republicans get cancer and Democrats get cancer. Republicans suffer from addiction and Democrats suffer from addiction. Republicans suffer from Alzheimer's disease and so do Democrats. We're doing things in a bipartisan way, and I am doing things in a bipartisan way that never gets any media attention, and that's really doing a disservice to the people of our district. That's why we appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and talk about our successes and the results we're getting.
Congressman, I'm about out of time. Once again, thank you so much for stopping by. Good luck, and we'll talk to you the next time you're through.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate the time.